So welcome to everyone who's joined us this evening. My name is Yaa Asare and I'm pleased that you've joined us for the fourth and the last in a series of 4 webinars. These interactive webinar conversations have been centred around reducing inequalities in the following areas: access to health and social care, mental health and well-being, employment opportunities, and today's topic, education. The webinars have been commissioned by the Disparity Response Programme within the Sussex Health and Care Partnership, which is made up of all Sussex NHS trusts and the 3 local authorities. Today's webinar is entitled An Anti-Racist Approach to Education. And let's be mindful that these issues that we're looking at this evening aren't just institutional or bureaucratic issues, but they are deeply felt, profoundly experienced matters of social justice and injustice that we are highlighting this evening. How can we all be part of the change that we all want to see? We've lined up a series of innovative, passionate and dedicated speakers and contributors for this event, followed by a question and answer section to discuss the conversations of the evening. But first, before we begin, a few housekeeping rules. Don't speak while you're on mute, as I just did. So to improve your Wi-Fi connection, please turn off other devices. Please keep your microphone on mute during the entire webinar unless you're speaking, and your camera turned off to give us all better connection. Please feel free to use the chat function to ask questions to our speakers and panelists. I will direct these to our speakers in the question and answer session. If you experience any issues, please click on the Zoom support button or email training@dri.org. If you are affected by any of the issues discussed tonight or want to express your thoughts or you need further resources, please email us at DRI. And please do tweet about the event. See details in chat. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Tanya Brown-Griffith, who will highlight the context and ambition of these webinars. Tanya is Programme Director for the BAME COVID-19 Disparity Response Programme, Sussex Health and Care Partnership, which is the integrated care system. Quite a lot of interference at the moment. I don't know if we can do anything about that. She's responsible for the management and leadership of the programme team and for the delivery, monitoring and reporting of all workstream activity within the programme under 3 main areas: 1, workforce; 2, population, health inequalities; and 3, community and engagement. Tanya, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Yaa. So I think, as Yaa mentioned, I am the Programme Director for the BAME, or Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Programme across Sussex Health and Care. And Yaa also mentioned that this is a partnership which brings together 13 organisations across the NHS, local councils that look after healthcare, social care and public health into what is known as an integrated care system. And we can therefore take collective actions to improve health and care outcomes for our population. The BAME Disparities Programme was set up in May 2020 as a direct response to the disproportionate impact that the COVID-19 pandemic was having on our BAME communities, or very diverse communities, and also in recognition to the fact that we need to do more to address long-standing health and race inequalities, including those wider determinants that Yaa mentioned. Those are factors that help to determine our health, such as deprivation, unemployment, access to housing, and addressing racism in education. We also know structural racism in terms of organizational, interpersonal, and structural do have such an impact on outcomes in terms of health and behaviors. Some of the disparities that we've noticed across Sussex within the education system includes in the 2019-2020 school census, approximately 20% of Sussex pupils in primary and special schools and 18% of those secondary pupils were in pupil referral units, and they were from BAME groups, especially from mixed Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. And this is an overrepresentation compared to the percentage of those pupils within the school population. Another statistics is that 2019-2020 school census, a lower percentage of Sussex pupils from Asian and Black categories within our BAME groups were assessed as not meeting the expected standards of development at age 4 and 5. We know that Black pupils in Brighton and Hove and West Sussex have on average lower attainment at GCSEs. We also know that young Black and mixed students are more likely to have temporary school exclusions, and the likelihood increases to permanent exclusions, which last reports suggest in 2018-2019, 2 to 3 times more likely when compared to other ethnic groups. So this is in fact in East and West Sussex, 2 to 5 times more likely that we have our young Black and mixed students in permanent exclusions. We also know that our Black students who leave school between ages 16 and 18 are not in education, employment, or training during those age ranges. And in Brighton and Hove in 2016, the data suggests that it was 17% when compared to the city figure, which was only 4.7%. So this is just to highlight the real disparities within the education system and the real chance and opportunity we have tonight to talk about ideas, talk about what we're doing, but also really focus on what we need to do to come and what we need to do next. Really thankful for all our speakers for joining this afternoon. We're proud to have facilitated this webinar with DRI, who have coordinated and hosted this evening's event. And we're so thankful to you, the audience, for joining. So as with other webinars, we will produce a report at the end, which will be shared with all our participants. Really have a good evening and please share experience. Please be as transparent and honest with us. We really depend on your feedback to improve our services. Thank you, Yaa.
Thank you so much, Tanya. You've laid out some of the really important and concerning context for this webinar. So let's move on to part 1 of the session. So part 1 is really to feature community experiences and action. The first speaker for this part of the webinar is Aflo the poet. She's a spoken word artist based in Brighton whose voice has been heard all over the city at recent BLM protests. Influenced by hip hop from an early age, her work takes a rhythmic flow while addressing hard-hitting topics such as racism, decolonisation, trauma, and mental health. Aflo the poet is currently in the 2nd year of her PhD at the University of Brighton, researching experiences of intimacy and mental health. She's a former student of mine, and I've had the pleasure of hearing her perform her poems on a few occasions, and she hits home and takes my breath away. Aflo, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's an honour to be here. As Yaa said, I'm currently studying at the University of Brighton, and Yaa has had a huge impact on me, my career, my involvement in the community, as she is the only Black educator I've ever had in my entire lifetime, my 18 years of education in schools and universities. So it's great to be alongside you here. So yeah, I'm Aflo the poet. I've been writing and performing for just shy of 2 years now, and I've gained a lot of traction over 2020 by incorporating creativity and poetry into activism. encouraging people to listen to more difficult topics by rhyming every so often seems to make a difference. So I have two poems I'd like to share with you this evening. The first is Decolonised Rhymes. This is something I wrote back for an event between Brighton and Sussex universities in December 2019. And I speak about statues being taken down. And so it was incredible to watch that happen last year. And I'm hoping that we continue to make progress. But yeah, this is Decolonised Rhymes. Here's a simple equation. Lower expectations for POC students plus an unrepresentative curriculum rooted in colonisation equals attainment gaps. Less brown folks wearing graduation caps, less brown folks making waves in society, less brown folks gaining academic notoriety. And I think it's a travesty that students can reach the third year of their degrees without confronting or being told to read the likes of Fanon, Hill Collins, Morrison, Davis, and Hooks. Yet, in all these reading lists, in all these books, is dead white man after dead white man after dead white man after dead white man. And I won't go on because you know I can. This is not an unconscious bias. The word unconscious is consciously adopted to absolve responsibility. All them white names weren't put there inconspicuously. The sun hasn't set on the colonial empire. Philosophical underpinnings pin us down like shackles. Academic repression perpetuates oppression, perpetuating violence in the silence of Black academia. Roads must fall, and roads must be analysed in context and subject to criticism. Dismantling statues alone won't dismantle systemic racism. And I'm sure if we taught the works and the likes of Tupac Shakur, there would be an abundance and more young Black men interested in theorising critically, a breath of fresh air from the stank of the strange fruit still hanging in the libraries. Because if the only times we hear about our kinds are intertwined in struggles and isms, then how are we supposed to rise to further education full of promise and hopes and ambitions? How did people who look like me contribute to history? Science, maths, geography, psychology, colonialism cloaks these hidden figures and keeps young minds from growing bigger. You know, they say the glass ceiling stops white women from achieving anything white men can do. Well, at least it's glass, so they can see through. Imagine if that ceiling was made of concrete. I tell you, it tastes one half of bittersweet. A lack of role models and people lighting the way, leaving colourful minds to dwindle and decay. But we're here to take a stand, and we can bring about change if we could deconstruct and consider knowledge in different ways, like how I'm inspired by poets living in our times who should be just as revered, if not more than Shakespeare. Inspired by the likes of Stormzy, Dave, and Akala, I have been guided to wear my knowledge and talents as my armour. So if they say education is the key to liberation, and if you're keeping it colonial, you've got an obligation to explain to your students, researchers and scholar activists why you're keeping it white and you ain't bothering to challenge it. So stay down if you're down with the white institution. We're Black and we're brown and we are the revolution. Thank you. Oh, it's nice to see some familiar faces and names in the chat. You're all so kind. Thank you so much. So I have one more poem I would like to perform. It's only half a poem actually, because I wrote this with my dear friend and fellow activist Chris Nash. You can check her out at Chris Nash Poetry on Instagram and Facebook, but I'll put links in the comments. So this is one half of Wake Up. We wrote this as part of the Brighton Black Lives Matter movements over the summer. And we wanted to talk about how it felt waking up to people waking up to the racism you've woken up to every single day. and then what it feels like for people to fall straight back to sleep afterwards, because that is what's happened. And I'm so grateful that there are still conversations like this going on where we can reignite our passion, because we do care. There is a desire to change, and it's difficult to do it alone. So there's real power in unity and strength in numbers. But yeah, this is Wake Up. Trigger warnings for loss of Black lives and police brutality. Wake up. Clear my eyes to blur them again. Tears seem to be a permanent fixture. 2020 vision could not have predicted this picture, for I am not my ancestors' wildest dreams. Their tears flood the River Niger, breaking banks at the seams as they see. In 2020 vision, we're still fighting to be free. The images of Black bodies swing from my eyelashes. It's so tragic. There's a habit of picking up a movement when the hashtag's running rampant. But when Say Their Name stops trending, the masses replace their blinkers, act like our oppression has ended. I'm tired of the amnesia after white folks say, I hear ya. I'm tired of being tired because I'm tired when I wake up to the rhythm of disruption. Worldwide eruptions because we're sick of the corruption. 11 months later, laws passed in her name, but the cops who killed Breonna Taylor are still walking free today. And it isn't just the US. The UK is not innocent. To disagree is ignorant. You clearly ain't been listening. 3 years since Rashawn Charles and Edson DaCosta. Sarah Reid needed help, but in a prison cell, she lost her life. London riots after Mark Duggan was shot and killed on sight. And the Simeon Francis story clearly ain't sitting right. We're marching for Sean Rigg, Kingsley Burrell, Olucheni Lewis. We're marching for all the Black lives taken and the many more lives ruined. We're shouting justice for Joy Gardner because we've ripped off the tape, and it's been too many years now. We are done hesitating. We are here to shake up. It is time to wake up, and I breathe. I question how many more people would care once I stopped. Marching for our lives once we're dead is little reprieve. In a way, this is amazing, but in a way, it's not, because there's hardly any acknowledgement that they're late to the party. Some have the privilege of just waking up to the world we breathe as we choke. Literally, why you have to wait to catch our last breath on film to be outraged, to me, is a mystery. And yeah, Black magic is in the air, but show up next month and show me you still care. Because the fight isn't over at the end of the protest. If your performance has no substance, then your presence here is worthless. Will Black lives still be on your mind tomorrow when you wake up? Wake up tomorrow and sign a petition. Wake up the next day and donate to a fundraiser. Wake up the day after that and support a Black business. Wake up the day after that and buy Black art. Wake up the day after that and educate yourself on Black history. Wake up the day after that and educate your loved ones on Black history. Wake up the day after that and check in on your Black friends. Wake up every day and prove this movement is not a moment. Tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the day after, show us Black lives matter. Every day you wake up. Thank you. Oh.
Wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Just the comments are flooding in. Oh, that's, yeah, powerful stuff. What an amazing start to this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know I've shouted a lot, and I'm probably not shouting at anyone in this webinar because we're all here for a reason. But if you'd like to hear more of my work, I am Aflo the Poet, and you can find me on social media at aflo.thepoet, and I will put that in the chat. Yaa, so much love to you, and to DRI, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. So let's now move on, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marlon Moncrieffe. Dr. Marlon Moncrieffe is the author of Decolonising the History Curriculum, Eurocentrism and Primary Schooling. He's worked in primary school education and higher education for over 20 years. His academic research focuses on 20th century Black British lives, experience and histories for advancing teaching, learning and education for all. Marlon is a true inspiration. I see him as being at the forefront of change, and I've had the pleasure of working with him on the editorial board of Decolonising the Curriculum publication that he's instigated at the University of Brighton. Marlon, over to you.
Thank you, Yaa. Brilliant. Aflo, brilliant. Thank you, DRI, for inviting me. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to come and talk with you. And it's been great working with Yaa. We've done some fantastic things. Hope people will appreciate the work that we're doing at Brighton. I'm going to talk about my book, Decolonising the History Curriculum. And I've got some slides. I'm hoping that these are going to be shared with the entire group. Perfecto, brilliant, there they are. So decolonising the primary school history curriculum, transforming approaches to teaching and learning about national identity and nation. And so, yeah, as Yaa said, I work at the School of Education at the University of Brighton. I'm a former primary school teacher. I taught for 14 years, became a deputy head teacher. And yeah, I've been at the University of Brighton School of Education for about 8 years now. Next slide. Let's go through these slides really quick because there's so many other great speakers to come along. So here are some discussion points from my presentation. Firstly, Black Lives Matter in education. And there's been some calls for teaching and learning about Black British histories following the BLM anti-racism protests last year. So we're going to look at those calls and understand where the government's position are on those calls. There was an important discussion in Parliament today. Some of you may have seen government responses to the 250,000 signed signature from the public. And then I'm going to talk about decolonising curriculum knowledge, historical consciousness as a theory to do that. And just to sort of give my position that diversification of curriculum follows on from decolonisation. And then a bit of research that I've done with trainee teachers and how they've used some resources that I've created to centre the Black British voice in teaching and learning and to position with critical curriculum thinking, really necessary. So these are the opportunities that I want to share with educators for their future practices in the classroom, particularly at Key Stage 2. Next slide. So fact of the matter is that nothing much has changed for Black people in the 400 years of displacement in the racist system. It's basically a generational time warp for Black people, isn't it, really? The past, even those slave rebellions of the 19th century, which overthrew slavery in the Caribbean, to the 20th century inner city uprisings of the 1980s in Brixton and Liverpool, all around the country, to just last year with the more recent anti-racist Black Lives Matter protests. All of those occurrences from the past, the recent and the more recent, they're all Black Lives Matter protests. Nothing much has changed. What's going to happen in the future? Well, that's down to us in the now to change the future, isn't it? But Black people are still fighting for their human rights, generation after generation. So, following the protest of 2020, the teaching and learning of British history came under mass scrutiny. Calls for changes to the national curriculum became louder through those public petitions that I've spoke of. These have been presented in Parliament. As I said, over 250,000 people signed the public petition concerning the need for explicit teaching and learning about Britain's cultural diversity as part of the national curriculum, and particularly through the teaching of Black British history. Today in Parliament, this appeal was again given the snub by the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb, saying that there's nothing wrong with the curriculum. It offers a broad and balanced approach to teaching and learning. So the call for changes have been rebuffed by the government response, insisting that the curriculum is broad, balanced and flexible enough for teaching and learning British history through Black British lives and experiences. And there is possibly some justification in this response, particularly where the history curriculum aims state that they want to ensure that pupils know and understand the history of these islands as a coherent and chronological narrative. from the earliest times to the present day, how people's lives have shaped this nation and how Britain has influenced and been influenced by the wider world. So there may be some justification in that claim from the government. Next slide. However, what the issue is that what these government responses do not acknowledge, which they continue to fail to recognise or don't want to speak about, is that all of the starting points in the national curriculum are Eurocentric and white-only historical starting points. Okay, there are no starting points that begin with non-white British people, Black British people, Brown British people, if you want to use that term, Asian British people. They're all white British starting points. So therefore, it's white British starting points that shape that default position for the teacher in teaching about national identity and nation. So, for example, Britain's settlement by the Anglo-Saxons and Scots, Viking and Anglo-Saxon struggle in England are statutory components of the national curriculum that children at primary school will have to learn about as part of their understanding of how national identity and nation has been formed. So there's an inherent bias in the national curriculum that needs to be decolonised. Next slide. So let's examine the issue a bit more through my interpretation as a Black British man born in London, lived in England all my life, former primary school teacher, now a teacher, educator, researcher, interested in knowing how 20th century Black British histories can be used in transforming opportunities for role in curriculum teaching and learning in the primary school. I see that this must begin with decolonising curriculum content. To decolonise the curriculum is to identify the potential of epistemic violence, which I've done, that can be inflicted on the learner in receipt of the statutory imposed historical epistemology, or in other words, Anglocentrism. And there's much research, as you can see on this slide, there's much research over the years that shows you that speaks of this oppression towards young Black, young Asian students, young students of colour, the oppression that they face by the current history curriculum, which puts them off learning history, which stops them from going on to becoming historians and teachers of history because of that dominant Eurocentric history curriculum, that epistemic violence. Next slide. So my evidence-based academic research, Decolonising the Curriculum, Eurocentrism in Primary Schooling, offers a detailed examination of why and how white-only curriculum direction and guidance continues to dominate the statutory content directives and guidance of the primary school history curriculum. In short, the curriculum is to support the cultural reproduction and communication of an Anglo-centric national narrative as a source of national identity and for a fixed idea of nation. In the now and in the future. That is what the document is for. But my position is that national identity, people of the British Isles, is something that cannot be manufactured and imposed on the people by the government, even though it is at the moment, via the history. History is in fact made by the people of the British Isles. These people change over time. They are the history makers. Here we are in the now, in the 21st century, 2020, 21. We are the ones that create our national identity, and we should aim to challenge the government on their own interpretations of that. Next slide. So the way in which we can see these different positions of history or of historical identity is through this notion of historical consciousness. One of the key arguments concerning the function of teaching and learning history in schools is about its purpose. Some commentators, government commentators, argue that British history should be fixed on giving facts of a British story as a master narrative to maintain a traditional orientation with historical consciousness. So what is learned in the now is always going to be learned in the future, because that is what we learned in the past, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, and so on. That is the way we understand about our identity as British people. So those specific episodes of British history are going to be statutory components of the history curriculum. That is one particular position, okay? Whilst the other position is more of a critical form of historical consciousness, which says that history is more fluid, okay? It's more like a river. The past is referenced, but times and people on the British Isles have changed. The essence of history through this process maps transformation, i.e. seeing the past and the present for perceiving future possibilities in our identity. This way of seeing fits with the critical orientation with historical consciousness. It means that any given exemplary moments in the national curriculum, for example, by the government, can be challenged for their relevance and their meaning and their value in the present. Next slide, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is what I mean by diversification of curriculum follows on from decolonisation. Decolonising the curriculum through critical orientations with historical consciousness offers enlightenment for realising that one-dimensional Eurocentric knowledge has been privileged by the statutory contents of the current curriculum, national curriculum. Seeing and accepting this can transform thinking about the possibility of broader forms of knowledge for teaching and learning. Encompassing Black British lives and experiences in teaching and learning is a starting point for providing teachers and learners with a curriculum that is more representative of the full range of past experiences. After engaging with these enlightenment processes of decolonising, emerges the possibilities, the creative possibilities for diversification of the curriculum. So you have to decolonise before you diversify. People step to diversifying the curriculum, but in effect, what they're doing is they get to the destination without understanding the journey. Okay, so you have to go through the journey of decolonising before you can diversify. So that's really important to have that foundation as to knowing what you're doing. Next slide, please.
Marlon, you've got a couple of minutes left.
Right, next slide. So I did some research with white British trainee teachers, and this was really important to sort of juxtapose migration, the way in which migration was taught by the national curriculum. The reason why I worked with white British trainee teachers is because 85% of the teaching population in England and Wales are white British teachers in that respect, okay? And one specific question, the main question I asked them was, what does British history mean to you? And my diagnostic assessments looked at their socialisation, their education and so on. And what I found from that particular question and other sub-questions is that they basically regurgitated all of the Anglo-centric starting points that you would find in the national curriculum, Tudors, the Vikings. Not one of them spoke about Black British history in that respect. So therefore, here was an opportunity for me to see if I could challenge their traditional orientations with historical consciousness. Next slide. So what I did, because the way in which migration to the British Isles over the ages is taught in the national curriculum through cross-cultural encounters, Anglo-Saxons and Vikings in conflict, harmony coming out of that. I juxtapose that with the 20th century cross-cultural encounters between people of the Windrush generation and white Britain. Some people call them riots, some people call them uprisings, disturbances, still they're cross-cultural encounters between two different ethnic groups. And I asked these white British trainee teachers, to what extent could they see any congruency, any relevance in this form of mass migration, this history of mass migration, to the forms of mass migration that they're being asked to teach in the national curriculum. Next slide. And I mean, here are just some responses, and you'll find these responses in depth in my book. But if you go to the next slide, next slide, just a minute. If you go to the next slide, okay, you'll see just at the bottom there, which is quite an important quote from Diana. It's an anonymized student. She says, "Yeah, I think if we're going to be talking about tolerance and equality, if we're going to be teaching about those British values, which are statutory teaching and learning, fundamental British values, then we need to be teaching more multicultural perspectives within the curriculum." So I'm going to stop now for the moment because I've done about 8 minutes, okay? But the central message that I want to sort of leave you with is that critical curriculum thinking is so important for early teachers to emancipate themselves from those Eurocentric default positions that they encounter in their early years. If they are allowed to be critical curriculum thinkers, that is going to allow for a more broader and a more broader and more emancipatory approach in their teaching and learning for themselves and for their children. So read the book, have fun with it. Thanks very much, Yaa. Thanks very much, DRI. Stop there.
Marlon, thank you so much. That was that was really informative, and I would have actually liked to have listened to more. And what has remained with me is the phrase, you need to diversify, you need to decolonize before you diversify. I think that's really powerful, and it's a necessary lesson that many need to learn, because I think there's a lot of glib talk at the moment about what diversification is, and we need to focus on decolonising. So now I'd like to introduce Bola, Alysia, Ayonrinde. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Bola, your surname. So Bola is a deputy head teacher. I'm going to give you a proper introduction. In East Sussex, at Little Horses CV Primary School. She has over 10 years experience in teaching, both in the UK and abroad. Bola has a master's in children's literature, and her work on intersectionality has been published. Her experience within teaching includes leading many different curriculum areas, coupled with her passion for celebrating and developing multiculturalism and diversity within the curriculum. I've had the pleasure of hearing Bola speak before, and she combines her passion for equity with practical wisdom. Bola, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yaa. Amazing speakers so far. I'll try my best to follow on from them. So I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm speaking about promoting cultural diversity, building pupil knowledge and awareness, and curriculum development. So I just wanted to, let's skip the screen. First of all, say that children's knowledge and awareness of the world and how it impacts on their understanding, skills and relationships with the wider world and each other is key for educators to consider. During my master's, that was my first distinct realisation of the impact of unconscious bias through children's literature. Let's take the fairy tales, for example, which are a passionate point of mine, and I hope you can see this beautiful illustration and you can link that to a well-known fairy tale. There are hundreds of different multicultural texts, yet children are shown the blonde hair, blue-eyed, pale skinned, skin as white as snow. That's the representations that they are usually shown in schools. So what happens? There are certain assumptions made on both sides. Children of colour tend to struggle to associate with those tales because they can't see themselves in those stories. This works with fairy tales as well as other texts. Whereas white children tend to be able to link directly. They see themselves as the princesses, the princes, the heroic. And this is a key example of why it's so important that children are regularly exposed to positive examples to try and counteract unconscious bias. Being aware of our own unconscious bias is really important, especially as educators and leaders. We all have them, and it's important to acknowledge that. With children in school, we have to find the opportunities to explore and directly critique this in order for them to build awareness of the issues around racism. Unconscious bias is the most common form of racism in schools. So an example of how, especially with the younger year groups, I think it's really key to start from the young ones, is showing two different images, and you can ask the questions that are on the screen, for example. And when I've used this before with children, it allows you to start discussions and then leads to an exploration of stereotypes. Acknowledging and preempting that conversations around race equality may make some children and adults feel uncomfortable is really important in order to create a safe space. When I've spoken to children before and adults, they have said before that sometimes they feel uncomfortable because they might have witnessed a racist incident or heard a comment and didn't do anything about it. Some might feel uncomfortable because they've said that they actually happened to them and they didn't know how to respond. But then we can ask children, just because something makes you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about them. So at least then we've created that safe space for discussion. A clear distinction between the terms non-racist and anti-racist. When we speak about bullying in schools, we talk about the bystanders, the passive sort of bystanders there. And this can be clearly done with children in school. They need to know the difference of this so that they can then think about what impact this has. So is there more impact if you're non-racist or more impact if you are actually anti-racist? and looking at some examples like on the screen, really good to see with children and staff actually, in order for them to see that actually one has more impact than the other, and it's not good enough really just to sit there and watch. Let's move on to maths. I love sort of cross-curricular subjects. So statistics in maths, show them real statistics. This was gathered in May 2020. So start by asking the children, what do you notice? Are you surprised by these statistics? And then by saying things like, or asking questions, should I say, how could these statistics be changed? What could be done? Is already starting to lead the children to become anti-racist by giving them those real experiences. Okay, so here's a small selection. I've got a very extensive selection of book titles that can be explored with children in school and included on bookshelves. Some directly feature children of colour, some do not, and there's a good reason for that, which I'll explain in a couple of slides' time. Thinking about the terminology. Focusing on terminology is really important to promote individuality. For myself, I prefer to be called a person of colour because I have a mixed ethnic background. My parents are Nigerian and Brazilian. So when I spoke to my class, and to just give you a bit of context, I am in a predominantly white school. We spoke about different terminology, and I explained to them that some people like to be called black, some have different terminology they'd like to be used. They concluded, if you're not sure, maybe ask the person. And then the most beautiful conclusion that came out of my class was, wouldn't it be wonderful if one day the colour of someone's skin or where they are from is not used to describe them? Carrying on from terminology, racism tends to be used as the umbrella term when children are talking about certain incidents in schools or things that they have encountered. So making sure they understand the distinction between racism, discrimination and prejudice means that they're kind of speaking the same language across the school, so that when they, well, unfortunately, if sometimes they have encountered it, they can speak confidently about the incidents they've seen or what they have experienced. Even within my school, when I opened up this discussion, it was amazing to see children saying, oh, I was at a Brighton match and I saw this and I didn't know what to do. So it's really important we discuss these terms. Okay, promoting cultural diversity. We want it to be more about sameness and difference. Children are constantly exposed to negative images regarding people of colour. You can see the adverts on poverty, charity and aid, and also not being seen. So like on hair adverts, skin products. So your classroom should be a diverse classroom. So for example, this is one of my displays, and my class was named after Lauren Child. So I drew the characters to represent different diversities. So the children are seeing these images constantly. In my experience, children tend to associate people of colour as rappers, musicians, or in the sports field. However, it's really important to expose them to the mathematicians, the inventors, scientists, writers, poets, like Annie, definitely, to indirectly challenge the unconscious bias or stereotypes that they might have. Have a look at your school council. Do you have in there an equal opportunities and race equality ambassador? If you do, that would be amazing, because then the child can be active in the school and even within the governing body as well as the staff. So think about having that in your school council also. Okay, so moving on to curriculum development. This a nice place to start for some ideas. Look at the current topics being taught. And Dr. Marlon sort of touched on this amazingly. So especially in history, has there been an omittance in how the topic is being presented, or have assumptions been made about a country explored in geography? The books available in schools, the classroom, the library, the whole class text being read to the children. The Sustainable Development Goals are a wonderful way of giving a global perspective. The use of diverse names and images in the questions, model text, theories, displays. I find children can easily say Didier Drogba, but because they've been exposed to it. So use different names. Governors and teacher training, having an equal ops and race equality policy, trips that promote diversity. school visitors. The lady at the bottom there is actually my mum, and she was the first African mayoress of Wandsworth. She's still got a lovely head tie on, and I often ask her to come into school when we're discussing democracy, so they don't have just thinking, oh, she's in because it's Black History Month. Okay, so this is one of the texts. If you haven't come across it, it's absolutely amazing, Varmint. So that's a text that does not feature any children of colour or people of colour. But all the concepts there are really amazing to explore with children, and I've done that with quite a few classes. And then by the time they get to the middle of the story, we then explore what we could do, and they come up with peaceful protests. And that's a nice way in for them to understand really why we had Black Lives Matter and what it means to them. So it's not just something that flashes up on the news that doesn't mean something to them. They can really understand the depth of that. So staff wellbeing, as I know as a deputy head, it's quite hard to get the time. However, it is important to try and make the time. Hackney have made an amazing set of resources that can be downloaded by schools. There can be one login per school, all the way from early years to secondary. Do have a look at it, get a login for your school, and you can adapt and change the slides. But it's an amazing way of starting to decolonise the curriculum for your school. So I'd like to say thank you very much for the opportunity, and DRI for allowing me to speak today, and I hope you have found that useful.
Bola, thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant, and so many practical ideas there. So much practical wisdom. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mandy Curtis. Mandy is an experienced teacher, trainer and activist with over 20 years experience in anti-racist education in Sussex. As director of 18 Hours, the Development Education Centre for East Sussex, her current role is as a local advisor for the British Council, supporting schools across Kent, Surrey and Sussex with global learning. Mandy's PhD research in human geography and her first degree in African and Asian art history underpin her work in education and events, and her passion for education, diversity, inclusion and community. I've had the pleasure of working with Mandy over many years, both inside and outside of the university, and it's always a pleasure to learn from her. Mandy, over to you.
Thank you, Yaa. I'm going to just begin to share my slides, if you can just bear with me for a second. There we go. I'm hoping that you can see it. I'm going to go back. Yes, thank you. I'll try not to duplicate too much of what Bola has said, but we're coming from a similar perspective, I guess. I'm going to introduce myself really as an activist in my journey into anti-racism. So here I am with my best friend, who's still my best friend 50 years on. We call each other sisters, but you can see that there's a clear difference. And I guess this was when I was sort of woken up to difference. You know, we thought we were the same, we dressed the same, our shoes are the same, our bikinis and our hats are the same, but actually I realized quite quickly that people treated, you know, my best friend or my sister differently to me. Then I discovered, you know, Nelson Mandela and the injustices in South Africa. I joined the anti-apartheid movement. Very soon after that, I had my own children that have been through schooling in London and in Sussex, and quite problematic. They did actually have their hair covered in school, and subsequently in some of our research we've discovered pupils' responses to children with their heads covered. So I'm sort of passionate about activism from this perspective now, as well as a parent. This photo was nearly 20 years ago. They're all grown up now. I went to the School of Oriental and African Studies, as Yaa said. So again, you know, this was sort of a passion of mine to learn more. And we bring this into the education work that we deliver that I'm going to share with you this evening, and into our events work. We're lucky that we work with brilliant activists too. if I had time, I'd show you this video. I've put it on so that you can watch it in your own time, because I believe that DRI will share the slides with you afterwards. But principally, Grace Chitty is saying, you know, well, how come only 4% of children's book heroes are from Black and Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds? And she talks to the author and the illustrator of Look Up, who are part of this new Championing Diversity by Penguin. So you can see them on the right here. So this is Nathan and Dapo, and Dapo is only one of 2 Black illustrators in the country. So I sort of urge you to have a look at that. Stormzy is working with Penguin as well as an editor on this new series called Murky. Werner Alec Wilkins is another pioneer, I guess, in the publishing world, and she sort of shares her story to say that her son came home with a project of This Is Me and coloured himself in pink because it was for a book and to be published. And similarly, Darren Chetty also draws our attention to the children of colour writing a story or featuring white characters with traditional English names who speak English as a first language. And I guess really what we're trying to do within 18 hours and our resources that I'm going to share with you is to challenge some of this and to help teachers to challenge some of this. So we have a library where we are really strict about books that come into that we include in it. We take out anything that's over 10 years old unless it's really important to retain it. So we'll use those for contrast and change purposes. And we're not saying that there aren't houses made of natural materials in Africa, but what we're doing is really asking teachers to think about a balance. So if you teach rural, then teach urban. If you teach poor, then please teach rich, and generally balanced. And our books that we look for, really, we want these children on this particular cover to just be seen tidying up their bedroom and not being, you know, singled out because of any difference. In fact, we look for starting points being through similarities. So this is a fabulous book by Jeanette Winter. So we do recognise that there's difference, but we come to the starting point of similarities. We look for schools that normalise Black and Asian skin. So white skin is not seen as an ethnicity. White hair, you know, is not seen as problematic. And there's a beautiful film, Hair Love. Again, I'm just going to signpost you to watch this. It's an Oscar-winning short film with Beyonce's daughter as part of the narration. We look for books with positive representations. So, you know, do the books actually challenge stereotypes, or do they progress the discussion and, like I was saying, normalise the children as part of the story? One of our most recent books is Ibtihaj Mohammed, who's an Olympian, who's written about her experiences of racism. That's a beautiful book. We've got books that sort of echo what Bola was saying, and Marlon, I guess, as well, looking at different perspectives. So ways in for teachers using the curriculum. So the Rabbit is centred around Australia. It's a fantasy text, and the Encounter is Central America's, where the Indigenous communities are given a voice. There are books that we love that have been around for a long time. So books around everyday perspectives on South African life, books that engage in with women and the role of the grandmother in South Africa, that are charming, that are still, you know, written by white authors. So yes, we have, you know, more diverse books out there and more access to diverse books that will challenge, but we need to challenge some of our own assumptions when we found out that Nikki Daly was white. Fish Cook's one of our favourites as well. So here's so much. If you're not familiar with it, it's a lovely book. She's a Black British author, and I'm going to come to that a little bit more because, you know, we're really keen to stock books with Black British stories. And we work with teachers to develop teacher confidence. So again, I haven't got time to show you the clip here, but I wanted to sort of set a context of 33% of children in the UK come from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. In East Sussex, that's 13.6 of our children. And Chimamanda sort of says more about a single story in a little 20-minute TED talk than I can sort of relay in my very quick 10-minute presentation. So do go and listen to that if you haven't heard it. We're interested in current politics and what children are saying, what the playground talk is, and finding out and supporting teachers to address and to challenge some of the language that they hear. So the most hidden British community, I don't know whether you've worked this out yet. Oh, my slides aren't moving on. So you is the British Chinese community. So things like "you are the Chinese flu" that we're hearing at the moment, and we don't want your coronavirus in our country. I wanted to draw attention, I think probably it's going to come up with John's talk next as well, about a new group of educators of colour collective for governors and teachers living in Brighton. And just to say that as a teacher or an educator, you don't have to know all the answers. I don't know all the answers, but I encourage critical inquiry. And teachers need time and space and access to information. Don't forget that you've got the opportunity, you know, to work with parents. That was interesting, Bola, that you brought your mum in for the discussion on democracy. So not just for cooking, but actually for more positive roles as well. There is lots of help out there. Teacher training is essential. And we have a more flexible curriculum than when I was in the classroom, but actually, you know, we need to develop teacher confidence. The NEU has produced some new research that shows that Black staff are unfairly treated, and that there is stereotyping of staff. More Black and Asian minority staff have their capability questioned, and they set this within the context of sort of wider patterns of discrimination. So does the staff team reflect the community of the school? Does the school have a framework for race equality? And there's some guidance here to help with that. Does the school have structures in place to ensure accountability? And, you know, crucially, don't ask your Black employees to fix the problems with institutional racism. I want to share a recent project. So a teacher came to us, this is sort of sharing how we can perhaps help. She found that she was teaching about Benin and said, you know, I don't really know where to begin. I don't know anything about it. It was a joy for me. I literally sang. I dug out all of my books because I'd studied Benin when I was at SOAS, and here we were, you know, talking about it. Her children undertook a debate and looked at the items that are in the British Museum at the moment and debated where they belong. So, and debated what happened, you know, when they were taken from Benin in current Nigeria, present day Nigeria. That they might have been smarter than us when the Portuguese arrived on the West African coast, and that they thought overall that the Benin bronzes belonged to Nigeria. We run some some training through 18 hours that is free to access. So please take this up. We have a Global Teacher Award programme that's been developed over a few years with sister organisations, and I work with some colleagues to deliver this training. So as Yaa introduced, we have British Council support towards this training. And here we are in our new offices in Bexhill, which is lovely. It's central. It's near to Sainsbury's. You can pop in and borrow from our resources. Our resources are free for schools to use. We have collections of resources to help you if you're not sure where to start with. Mentioned the training. Our most recent research is into Black British authors, and we're just waiting on a funding announcement. So I've got fingers and toes crossed while I speak to you, because we want to start a Teachers Diversity Book Club. And I put out a call about 2 weeks ago because our funders had come back and said they were interested, although I haven't had the yes yet. I put a call out to teachers in Hastings where this funding was going to be coming from, and I had 9 teachers signed up within an hour to the Diversity Book Club. So we know that, you know, teachers are looking for support. Please do take a look at our website or contact us if we can help. Some of our resources are there, and I look forward to the rest of the session. Thank you to DRI and to Yaa.
Thank you so much, Mandy. That was so packed full of practical ways to challenge stereotypes, undo the dangers of othering, and to institute structural change. So we're really grateful to you. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce John Lynch. John retired in December 2013 after 25 years of headship in junior and primary schools in Croydon and Brighton. John's worked as a consultant for Brighton and Hove on closing the gap strategies for pupils of colour and on recruitment in teaching. He's the coordinator of a BAME mentoring programme for students of colour at Brighton University, and he's currently contracted to deliver identity-based mentoring programmes for students and pupils of colour. This involves university students mentoring school pupils in schools across Sussex. John's focused determination has and continues to be an inspiration for many of us, and he brings so much to this table by virtue of his experience and his passion to make the change that is needed. John, over to you.
Thank you, Yaa. I'll just share my screen. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. I feel very fortunate because every presenter that's spoken before me has spoken about the reasons for which we do this programme, for which the programme is in place. I've got only 10 minutes to talk about it, and that's going to be difficult for me because despite the fact that I was a head teacher for 25 years and thousands of children and families went through my schools, this is the best thing that I've ever been involved in. It's so impactful and so rewarding, and that picture there reflects how good the programme is. So I'm going to try and give you some history about it and some information about the sorts of impact that it has on individuals and institutions. So the programme began because of something that happened at the University of Brighton. When I finished being a head, I went to work at the University of Brighton as a placement tutor in the School of Education. Beth Thomas Hancock was already at the school. She was previously a governor of my last school. And we were invited to a meeting in the School of Education where they were looking at statistics and outcomes for students. And it was quite clear that if you were a student of colour in the School of Education at Brighton University at that time, you were less likely to get a 2-1 and you were more likely to drop out during the course. And that reflected something that Beth and I had seen in a widening participation conference up in Leeds, where somebody from Kingston University said that their university was experiencing the same with their black ethnic minority ethnic students. and was putting into place lots of different things to try and counteract that. We thought it would be an idea to develop a mentoring program, which we did. We set out a small pilot of about 10 students, and we approached people in the local community that we knew that were BAME professionals working in and around Brighton. I was blown away by the results of that pilot. 8 out of 10 of those students said that they would have dropped out had they not had a mentor. And they were telling us things that I experienced when I came down to Eastbourne as a student in the late 1970s, when there were only 4 of us in the whole college. I was really shocked, but perhaps I wasn't, because they were reflecting some of my own personal experiences. And it was interesting to see that those experiences that they had in university, in lectures, in society, affected their studies. I was talking to a teacher in a school in Brighton about this, and they said, could you do the same for us, for our year 11s? So we said yes, and again we set up a pilot. And the beauty of this pilot is that we went into the school and discussed it with the students first of all. We set up the pilot again, and it was very successful. Again, students responded well to having a mentor that was like them, from their culture, from their background, that had similar experiences that they could talk to about their life and about their school. It went well, so we applied to what was then NCOP and is now Uni Connect for funding. And we've been funded to deliver these programs in schools since about 2014. So we've mentored, using mentors locally and now nationally, and indeed internationally, because people have found out about our program and would like to get involved. We've mentored over 150 students in Sussex so far. Why is it important? That's why I reflected on what the earlier speakers have said, you know, what Aflo said, what Marlon said, what everybody has said about the experiences of people of colour in this country at the moment. And it reflects the global situation, the rise of the right, the building of walls, the refusal of people coming into your country, the debate about immigration, crime, stop and search, the way the media reports on black and brown people in this country. It influences children in school, it influences their thoughts, and then they go into school, and what are they faced with in school? All the things that Bola was talking about, not seeing books that reflect them, not seeing images that reflect them. I was talking to a girl in a school in Brighton, 13 years old, and she said to me, we don't see many black scientists. And then she muttered under her breath, there must be black scientists. We hear those sorts of things from kids all the time. So it's important that we acknowledge things like the attainment gap and children's experiences and the lack of diversity in Sussex. As Aflo said, you can go through the whole of your education experience in Sussex, just as Aflo did, and not have somebody like me or Yaa standing in front of you. I was in a school and there was, we were introducing the program, and a young boy misbehaved, and I invited him to leave if he didn't want to take part. He did take part and had a great time in the mentoring program, but he went home and told his mum that he didn't know how to behave in front of a black man in a classroom in a position of authority. So what's the model? It's a 6-week program. The mentors go into school at the moment because of COVID. We have to do it online, but even doing it online has worked really well recently. 6-week program, one-to-one mentoring in the school for 5 weeks. And then we have a celebration event at the university before COVID, where the children go into uni and have a look around with their mentors, and we sit and have something to eat. And there's a really lovely session where they write each other letters. We did the same online yesterday, and it was really emotional. Some of the students were close to tears because of what the pupils had written to them, thanking them for having the opportunity to sit down and talk to somebody who had similar experiences, similar aspirations, and was from a similar cultural background than them. And what are the topics that children discuss? When we go into schools, we're very clear about the fact that this is an identity match program, but it's not a negative program. It's not a negative based program. It's not about naughty children. It is about race and they do discuss racist banter and racism, but they discuss other things too, which help them with their studies and their aspirations. And as you can see there, revision, support, homework, how to improve schoolwork, time management, studies. They're fascinated by how university students manage their study time, and the students give them advice about that sort of thing. Sometimes there are issues about behaviour in the classroom, and some of the students talk to the pupils about being proud about who they are, not necessarily living up to the expectations of some of their white classmates, and being responsible. But this program isn't about behaviour. We sometimes have to emphasise that to schools, that, you know, it's not about naughty children. Some of the children, all of the children we meet have fantastic aspirations, and some of them are incredibly talented kids. About staying motivated, career prospects. We're funded by an organisation that promotes universities, but sometimes they talk about universities, sometimes they talk about other things that they want to do. Dealing with stress and negativity, and also racist banter and racism, which, as we know, children experience in schools and institutions. It's really interesting to see what people have been saying before me. We were working in a school today, and a teacher said that one of the children was drawing a picture of herself and was covering it over with her hand. And when she moved her hand away, she was drawing a pink child, and yet this child was black. And she said she didn't want to draw somebody who looked like herself. So these issues with older children can be discussed and spoken about in a confident and open manner with somebody who is like themselves. We research carefully, and we try and get feedback as much as possible about these programs, and the feedback we get is great. But they talk about lots and lots of different things, and that's the beauty of it. So it's about methods and ways to revise, about confidence. The two main things that come out of these programs is role models and confidence. Having somebody to talk to about relatable experiences, different ways of dealing with racism, because often secondary school children will experience racist banter and then consider who they can talk to in the school, where they can find somebody that looks like them, that appreciates their background, that understands their lived experience, and they can't. So it's good to be able to talk to students who are like them and from a similar background. Letting a teacher know what's happened, being confident to approach teachers, learning about using different resources to find answers, reflecting on experience. Sometimes students will talk to pupils about experiences that happened quite some time ago. They'll bring them up, and it's good for them to be able to talk them through with somebody and have a measured and reflective understanding of what happened and how they can react to it or bury it or deal with it, which unfortunately people of colour have to do, and we're brilliant at doing that sort of thing. Understanding about uni and being open to new ideas. So there's lots of things that can be gained from these programs. We also speak to parents and carers, and we get great feedback sometimes from the inception of the program, where parents have been in tears because it's the first time that their child has had the opportunity to develop a relationship with an older person that is a role model and that looks like them in an educational setting. But this is just a quote from somebody whose child experienced our program. And as you can see, a deeply insightful and transformative experience. I'll let you read it, but for me, this is one of the best quotes we have, but it's not alone. There are many, many positive feedbacks from children and parents about the benefits of a program like this. This is a picture of us working in a school in Eastbourne, and it just sums up the nature of this program and the benefits of this program. This is at the end of the program when they're at university on the Eastbourne campus, and we've just had the celebration of event, and they're sitting, mentor and mentee sitting together. And these are the same pupils and students as well who were a little bit shy, a little bit reticent when we first trained them and when they first met But when they meet, when they sit down together in a room and start talking, you just have to walk away and leave them alone. And you can see, you can witness the benefits of the relationships which they develop over time. And they do develop relationships in that short time. Yesterday, one of the students was quite emotional because he said his student had written on a piece of paper, "You are my friend." We obviously coach and train them that this isn't a relationship about friendship, it's a professional mentoring relationship. But we feel that some of these pupils will have a lifelong memory of their mentoring experience because of the benefits that it's given them. But it's not only about the aspirations of these students, it's about school practice. We go into some fantastic schools who are really well along the spectrum of developing equality and diverse practice in their school. And in other schools, they're not so far along that line. But in all schools, pupils are given the opportunity to tell their mentors about the practice in their school, not to criticize practice in terms of an Ofsted way, but to say things about their curriculum, things about the images they see about in the school, things about the role models they see in the school, all the things that Bola said, all the things that Aflo referred to and Marlon referred to about what their life experience is like in school and how schools can change that according to their opinion. It's a great way to get pupils' voice. It's a great thing for the pupils themselves. And indeed, it's really good for the students who develop their own communication skills and professional skills as well. The other thing that I'd just like to say is just quickly comment on BHECC, the group that Mandy mentioned. It's a group of teachers and educators in Brighton who have got together as a group. And one of the things that I struggled with, or that was difficult for me, is that I did not know in my time in Croydon and in my time in Brighton who the other teachers of colour were. And I would have loved to have had the opportunity to set up a group like this. And it's been set up by the teachers, the educators themselves, and they have a WhatsApp exchange, they have an email exchange, we meet every month, and we discuss issues around the education of young people of colour in Brighton. And it's also been influential in developing the anti-racist strategy at Brighton and Hove. But the good thing about it is that it's an opportunity for people to get together, just like these students in that picture there. These students and the pupils in the picture will help schools to develop. When I was ahead, I was always trying to develop my school in an inclusive and diverse way by the people we employed and by what we showed around the school. And it's always a challenge, and it's a challenge that we should always be up to. But this is a particular program, I think, that supports that work. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, John. That was so powerful, and it really gave us an idea of the brilliance of mentoring, the power of being able to see yourself reflected. And one phrase that you said really stuck in my mind, school as a challenging space for Black children. I think that's something that we really need to think about seriously. Thank you. So now we're going to continue, and this is sort of a slightly sort of different part of the webinar tonight. And we're going to hear a personal account from Josh Clarke, and we're also going to hear from our local authorities who will give us an overview of their agenda for local authority support to schools. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce Josh Clarke. Josh is a British Eritrean graduate working for UBS Investment Bank within risk and compliance. Josh left Westminster University with a first-class degree in international business, and he's now started his career in finance, working for one of the largest banks in the world. Josh is passionate about promoting racial equality, diversity and inclusion, and he's a member of multiple networks and initiatives within UBS that are focused on just that. I've known Josh for many years, and I'm so delighted that he's joined us today to share his experiences and to remind us of how far we still have to go. Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Yaa. And yeah, as Yaa was saying, I'm Josh. I'm a half Eritrean, half English, relatively recent graduate from the University of Westminster. And yeah, I've started my career at UBS. So, as Yaa said, Swiss corporation employing over 100,000 people. And being at the stage in which I am provides an interesting oversight into the differences between university life and now my career. At uni, I studied international business, which meant a lot of my modules included content focusing on the differences in culture, geography, language, and religion, and so on. And whilst I don't discount any of that knowledge, when I think about the prevalence of issues today, and I recall back to that time, I'm left questioning why more was not done to educate us. Learning about microaggressions, discriminatory behaviours in the workplace and during recruitment processes, pay and career progression. These are all topics that were barely addressed, or at least in my case and many other cases. And when you think about the ramifications, the significance is pretty worrying. These are supposed to be our future leaders, and it leaves you wondering if they're not going to be educated at this level, when will they be? So I think we've had some really interesting speakers talk about issues of education racism at earlier levels with Marlon, Bola and John, and I found all of what they said incredibly profound. But my opinion is that as individuals get older and older and their environments become more mature and sophisticated, the level of education they receive on these matters needs to mirror that and match that. These are subjects that need to be learned about as consistently as anything else if future generations have any chance of combating these issues. So moving on to my time at UBS, and I actually spent a year at UBS midway through my degree, which means that I've been able to sort of compare the differences before and after all the trigger events of the last year. And as you can imagine, there have been some changes. Training on topics relating to racism, diversity, inclusion and equality have all increased. We have significantly more speaker sessions that call on individual stories. Existing networks and societies that were created to provide support in these areas have received much more exposure and engagement. And we're seeing concerted efforts by our regulators to make sure that we have in place the right kind of organisational culture with the right support measures. Some of the more interesting discussions we're having are currently in relation to our equality initiatives and our trainings. The first is in relation to one of our initiatives around the idea of equal opportunity employment. And for those of you that don't know, I mean, I'm sure you've all heard of it, but it's a widespread industry standard in most industries, which states that there is no or should be no discrimination during the recruitment process based on a number of demographic categories: age, race, ethnicity, and religion. And on paper, that sounds good, right? But when you start to think about it, you know, it could be argued to be too idealistic a view. The world is not an equal place, and you realise you can't apply a blanket policy to an environment that has such high peaks and such low troughs. So what we've been thinking of doing is instead of impartial recruitment, you actually target the most disadvantaged and the most discriminated against groups. So it's an interesting idea, but equal opportunities is kind of one of the 10 recruitment commandments, so it's quite a tricky one to swing. And the second, which is something that came up just recently, I was part of a session focusing on the idea of race fluidity, which was a new concept to me. It's essentially how comfortable we are talking about matters of race, ethnicity and culture. And as part of the session, there was a poll asking how comfortable people were discussing these matters. And to my surprise, the main answer was somewhat uncomfortable. So in our own organisations, we have a lot to do. And as I said, we need to be working on shifting from waiting until the next trigger event happens for organisational societal change. And we need to be promoting proactive cultures and environments where issues of all kinds can be openly discussed and acted upon in meaningful ways. And so to close, I mentioned at the start that I had a few actions that we could all take to hopefully create a better, more open and inclusive environment. There's 3 that I have here. You could do one or you could do all of them. I think they apply pretty well to both work and education. And the first is challenge your employer or educational institution to do more. See the areas that your business or school can improve in, whether it's creating a more inclusive environment by implementing policies or standards, or even just delivering more training on these kinds of topics. The second is to develop working networks or societies devoted to sharing experiences, delivering messages, and supporting your colleagues through distribution of messaging and that kind of thing. And the third, which I think is one that can sometimes be missed out, is if individuals aren't comfortable publicly speaking about these kinds of things, ensure that there are confidential, anonymized channels available for use. So these can be things like, forums, chat boards, or, to the most extreme level, sometimes whistleblowing hotlines. The key here is that their identity is anonymous and they can speak freely on these kinds of channels. So fairly quick one from me, but thank you all for your time and for listening to me, and thanks to DRI for giving me the time to speak about these kinds of things. And with that, I think I hand back to Yaa.
Thank you, Josh. Really interesting to hear what's going on, and also to hear your recommendations and your ideas on that. Right, so we now have 3 local authority representatives, well, 4 actually, from East Sussex, Brighton and Hove, and 2 from West Sussex. And they're going to highlight current initiatives and commitments towards supporting race equality in schools. I'm going to ask them if they might want to just cut their talks down a little bit so that we still have some time at the end for questions. So if you could just maybe think about doing that, and I'm sorry to have to ask you that, but I know that questions are a really important part of these sessions as well. So first, please let me introduce Atiya Gourlay. Atiya has a lead for embedding equality in children's services in East Sussex. Her team supports youth voice and involvement of families in service development, as well as collaborative approaches to partnership and funding. She started her career at TV Asia, which I never knew, and then was press officer for Liberty at a pivotal moment for human rights in the UK. She's worked in Brussels with local government association, and then at the Inter-Parliamentary Union in Geneva. In 2000, Atiya returned to the UK as public consultation lead for Lewes District Council, and soon moved to East Sussex County Council, where she has held several roles over the years. It's always been a total pleasure to work with Atiya and to have the confidence that she works towards implementing change. Atiya, over to you.
Thanks, Yaa. That's a lovely intro. So Rukia, I think you're going to show my slides because I get a bit anxious about showing them and speaking. Just start that. So I'm going to be taking your instructions very literally, Yaa, and being very short with this. So I'm the start of 3 of us who are going to talk. Myself from East Sussex, and I think then it will be Brighton, Hove and West Sussex, just to demonstrate the commitment across Sussex and to remind ourselves that this is part of a Sussex-wide commitment to thinking about advancing race equality in our schools. So my task to you today is to talk about the work we're doing in East Sussex to encourage our schools to take a whole school approach to promoting race equality. So in East Sussex, what we have done as a start is to develop some guidance for our schools on this work. Can you have the next slide, please? So on the day that we were launching this guidance, which was towards the end of last year, this was a launch for our governors. I received an email, absolutely interesting that day, timely email from a parent. And the email was from a parent who talked about their child who was very upset at an incident and experience in their school. So I'm going to read that out. The teacher had said that their child was upset due to taught content about slavery, which had been shared for Black History Month in October. The teacher said that it was nothing bad, like it had been a child-friendly version of the slave trade. The teacher used the phrase, nothing bad, perhaps to try to reassure my partner, this is the parent talking in the moment, but in the process, my child had exposed the assumption that no one in the class would be personally impacted by the horrors of this history. My child had a deeply held sadness about this history because it is their history. About white people, she felt somehow denied that it's also our history, and it's mine as a British person. And this parent who had sent this was actually white herself, so she was talking about the experience of her child as a mixed heritage, mixed race child, and how she felt after this. So I said, thank you very much. It was a fantastically honest, very timely. And I put an email back and said, well, talking to your child, what do you think your child would have liked to see? So can I see this next slide, please? And this is what I got back. The child had a conversation with their parents, and she was absolutely so eloquent. All the things that we've been talking about earlier this evening that Bola has raised, Yaa, Mandy, Marlon, John, all these things. And she said, don't use your resources without your own input. I think what had happened was that the story of slavery had been very much a sort of cut and paste of a lesson that the teacher had found on Twinkle, I think it is. There wasn't enough time for proper discussion. So those discussions about where slavery was placed, the context of it, she talks about when talking about it, it was really important to talk about who made it and who controlled it, not just express and describe it. And she said, also when you're talking about the firsts, in any case, in relation to the first scientist, the first doctor, the first teacher, in terms of the first Black, talk about the impact of racism, and that's why it was made difficult for Black people to be in certain positions and certain jobs, which I thought were really interesting and really important points. So I really wanted to share that with you, to say that on the day of that guidance, I had this email, and it really helped us focus in relation to making the parents feel confident that we're starting to do this work. So I just want to quickly show you a little bit about the guidance, and that will be the end of my slides to go on to my colleagues in West and Brighton. So the next slide. This is what our guidance looks like. It's a guidance for schools produced at the end of last year. And the next slide just sets out, so these are the, I've just put this out. We are promoting the whole school approach, and we talked about these elements. Appropriate teaching and learning, which we've talked about today, developing that governor and teacher confidence, ensuring participation and involvement, that was also discussed today around school councils, for example, promoting that positive sense of identity and well-being, and that's very much integrating that work within, for example, PSHE lessons, addressing racist incidents and racist bullying, and that's very much, and I think John Khan put that up earlier today around new guidance from the government about the sorts of strategies you can take within the school, making sure that you've got appropriate policies, audits, monitoring, and self-evaluation, so you know where you are, what the baselines are, and you can actually demonstrate progress and improvement. And finally, and this is very much what Josh was talking about, really thinking about supporting our Black and minority ethnic teachers and our staff. Can we have the next? So this, I want to end with this, a couple of points around some highlighted checklists. So we've talked about, even if you looked at one page in the guidance, this would be a really useful thing to start with. Do you have a quality policy in place? Do parents know how to access it? Is there an equality working party? Have your governors received training? Do you know about your staff? Can I have the next slide? This is very much about conversations with pupils that explore race and racism, talking about links with other schools, the whole issue around having a multi-faith calendar. You can see Black History Month is celebrated, and I would say and more, and throughout the year. And also we've highlighted here around all staff understanding the process for reporting and recording a racist incident. And the final slide, again, saying this is about communication, making sure you have these policies for racist incidents, racist bullying, are those communicated, and how well to all staff and pupils. And do pupils themselves know how to report it and understand that it will be taken seriously? Do we monitor our staff, BAME staff, in relation to recruitment and retention? Do we support their progression? And do we ensure that we understand experiences and take them seriously against BAME staff? And the final slide, yeah, just to say that, I always use this quote, Rabindranath Tagore. This is about, yes, there are differences. It is Inequality is about recognising differences and about supporting our schools, our staff, and our pupils and parents. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Atiya. Really, really useful to look at that guidance and to be inspired by what change needs to take place and what we can do. And I think those practical steps are really important for everyone. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sam Beal. Sam leads the Equality and Anti-Bullying and PSHE services, providing guidance, resources, consultancy and training to schools in Brighton and Hove. Sam has worked with and for national organisations such as the Sex Education Forum, PSHE Association and Stonewall, and is committed to partnership working nationally, regionally, and with communities and partners in Brighton and Hove. Sam will provide a brief update on the progress on Brighton and Hove's anti-racist schools strategy and plans for how this work will be led in the future. Sam's commitment to race equality has for many years been an inspiration to those concerned with education in Brighton and Hove. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Yaa. And that last sentence wasn't a bit in my biography, but thank you. And thank you for this invitation. I'm really relishing sort of the cross-county working and, you know, hearing from the expertise of everyone here. I am going to speak at mega speed, and so I'm probably going to be clumsy in some of the description of what's been going on in Brighton and sort of how we're planning to move that forward. But hopefully it'll give a bit of a flavour, and the invitation in the chat to ask questions, including we can pick those up outside of the meeting today. So I suppose I wanted to start with the fact that there has been bits of race equality work going on in Brighton and Hove across many years, and involving lots of people who are in the webinar here today. But there has been the acknowledgement, and I think a significant acceptance from myself personally and the council more widely, that this hasn't gone deep enough, it hasn't gone far enough, and it hasn't come from a strong enough perspective in acknowledging the systemic nature of racism. And so with the sort of the events in the United States, there was a quick response from councillors in Brighton and Hove, and sort of prompted by letters written from members of the Brighton and Hove Educators of Colour Collective, sort of statements written, commitments given to extend racial literacy training across Brighton and Hove and extend a commitment and support for work in that area. But with, you know, the critical friendship of the Brighton and Hove Educators of Colour Collective and the support of race equality consultant Agarwal from Race Matters, and through meetings and discussions, it became clear that we wanted to do something different to what had gone before. And so this has begun with the drafting of a strategy by ABBA that we have been engaging schools with and sort of community members with through alongside a racial literacy, a very introductory sort of racial literacy training, but that sort of in itself supports the description of where the strategy is coming from. And today, in fact, a business case is being presented to Budget Committee in the Council, for which we're hoping to get an award of, well, we've asked for an award of £100,000 over the next 5 years in order to really build the resource, the momentum and significant change. And so from March, we're hoping to recruit to roles and sort of deliver on this strategy. I'm not going to sort of say much about this, but, you know, the strategy is strongly underpinned by principles. And I think the ones that I just thought I would pick out today, or the one that, you know, and again, this is sort of ABBA's work, but the focus of the strategy, both on dismantling racism, but also supporting children and young people, staff of colour, children and people of colour, and parents and carers in navigating their experience of racism in the here and now, because we know it's here, we know it exists. Atiya has just described the experience of being taught slavery. This week I've heard about young people really struggling with how Islam is being taught in their schools. And so, you know, there needs to be resource thinking training about how we're going to address that. And I think something that's coming through from this engagement phase is the importance of working with parents, the parents of children of colour, BAME children and young people. And so our sort of strategy areas don't look dissimilar to sort of the whole school approach, you know, that Atiya's just shown us in guidance. So very sort of similar areas there, and many of which that have been really skillfully sort of touched on by the speakers here today. So I'm hoping that being on this call will bring us, you know, good news in terms of the budget committee today. But even if we don't get that funding, you know, we will find ways to do better work than has gone before. And, you know, I'm taking that on myself as well to do better than has gone before. So, yeah, thank you.
Sam, thank you so much, and it's really exciting to hear about what's going on in Brighton and Hove. So let's hope that comes through. Thanks for sharing that. So the next speakers I'd like to introduce are from West Sussex, and I'd just like to introduce both of them together, and then maybe they can go one after the other. So first, Helen Johns. Helen is the Assistant Director for Inclusion and SEND in West Sussex, SEND. I'm sure she'll tell us what that stands for, and leads the inclusion team, which sits within the Education and Skills Directorate. This team includes all services supporting children and families with SEND and the Ethnic Minority and Traveller Achievement Service. And her talk will be followed by Olly's, and Olly Davidson is the manager of the Ethnic Minority and Traveller Achievement Service in West Sussex. So they are a team of advisory teachers and liaison officers who work with schools to develop best practice and champion high expectations for children from ethnic minority backgrounds, with particular work supporting traveller pupils and their families and children who learn English as an additional language. So Helen and Olly, over to you.
Thank you, Yaa, that's really helpful. I just wanted to say such an inspirational evening. I'm almost overwhelmed by some of the speakers I've heard this evening. I've come along not because I bring a whole lot of activities to share with you. We're in West Sussex at quite an early stage in our journey in supporting anti-racism in education. But what I wanted to come along as the head of inclusion was to express our really strong commitment to this whole agenda. And Olly will talk to you a little bit in detail about what we've managed to achieve so far. But certainly in terms of leading an inclusion team, we are very focused on shifting the culture of inclusion in schools in its broader sense. And obviously, Yaa mentioned that also special educational needs is a huge part of my work and has been, but equally, I've had experience of working amongst diverse cultures and working like Olly does with a large range of different children and their families from different cultures, and that experience of the curriculum and that need to shift the culture around the curriculum, which everybody has expressed so eloquently this evening. For us, it's a huge drive around inclusion in West Sussex schools to really ensure that our school leaders are reflecting on the principles around inclusion, which encompass that the whole agenda around anybody who experiences any sort of inequality, but also, as Olly will go on to talk about, an anti-racist element. So thank you so much for welcoming me to this evening and being able to be part of this cross-Sussex piece of work.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, I'll just take a moment if I can, just to kind of give a brief overview of what we've managed to do so far. As Helen says, I think we're maybe at quite an early stage in our journey on this, and I think definitely much see it as a journey. I think it's probably best explained in terms of a dual approach, really. One around working with schools, training with schools. We started some training last year around recognising racism and celebrating diversity, and lots of the things that we've seen reflected from the fantastic contributions this evening reflect a lot of the topics and the themes that have been spoken about with schools in that. And then following on into the creation of network groups of schools who are particularly interested in starting to do some really good work around that, to share good practice. And there's a real desire from schools to have that peer support and to have those conversations with other schools and to ask for advice and guidance, and to really feel supported along that journey. But similarly, alongside that, there's a recognition that within the local authority, we need to have some difficult conversations ourselves, to do that learning, and so we're looking at training, and we have begun the process of rolling out training across the local authority, not just in education and skills, but there's a lot going on within social care, within health, within youth justice. And so we're really determined, I'm really determined that we join all of that up, and we really kind of maintain the momentum that's begun over the past year, and lots of people have spoken about that, to really look at, so that across the board, in whatever kind of areas that we focus on and that colleagues work in, is that we've got the confidence, we've got the shared language to talk about some of these difficult issues, to look at our own, for individuals to look at their personal and their professional approach, but also as teams to look at the individual areas that we are responsible for, and think how much are we considering the needs of pupils, of children, of families from all ethnic minority backgrounds, whether it's around special educational needs, the curriculum, the questions that we're asking of senior leaders in schools, of governors, the training that's available for NQTs. We really kind of want to make sure that it's we're kind of at a really kind of across the board, really considering this, and so we want to work towards an approach which we feel kind of brings everyone into that. And so just one other thing to mention, just like to say, Atiya's document in East Sussex, we absolutely love it. We really like that, and that's something I think we've kind of been really impressed and really inspired by that, and that's something that that we're kind of really looking at and looking to build on. But also working with the Youth Cabinet in West Sussex. I think from the conversations and the work that we've done with schools so far, there's a real need to understand the lived experience of pupils from ethnic minority backgrounds in West Sussex schools. So we've been working with them to improve our training so that we can hear their voices and share their experiences in the conversations that we have with schools, but also working on some podcasts so that they can speak directly to other children and young people in the county, but also to professionals in schools and in the local authority as well. So, but yeah, just wanted to say, as others have as well, been such a fantastic evening, so much to share and to learn from others. So thank you for inviting us along.
Thank you so much, Helen and Olly. It's lovely to meet you, and I'm happy that you've been inspired by this session, and it has definitely been incredibly inspirational. We haven't got much time for questions. There have been a few that have come through, and I suspect we might finish on this one question. But all your questions are going to be written up and used in the report, so do continue to ask them. So the question that I have, and maybe you could, if you'd like to answer this question, any of the people that have spoken tonight, you could just unmute yourself and show your face. So this question, and it's an important question, and it's, how can parents be involved in these processes? How can parents be involved in these processes? Would anyone like to begin to answer that question? Atiya.
Yeah, so I suppose the answer to that question is parents can and should be involved in this process. And that's, if we think about where we are, so I'm sitting in a local authority, that's a sort of challenge to me about, well, what is the local authority doing to involve parents and carers in that process? In a very small way, I've just put in the chat that for the development of the guidance, we did speak to number of parents, but as I say, a number of parents and carers. So that probably was a handful, up to 10 that we spoke. But there's something about how can we talk in a wider way to parents and carers about it. One of the things I would say is parents and carers are also our staff. Parents and carers are also, and that is one way that we can talk to parents and carers through our Black and minority ethnic staff in our county councils. You've got over 2,000 people there altogether, but how many of that is BAME staff? That's going to be quite a lot, several hundred. And also I would say that we're starting to think about engaging with our BAME staff network around this issue. So again, that's staff focused, but also setting up a network of BAME staff to talk to them, and many of them will be parents, and also to increase our sort of more public conversation about this through our sort of communications. So that's a series of ways that we should be doing this.
Thank you, Atiya. Great. Would anyone else like to try to also address that question? Would anyone else like to add anything to thinking about how parents can be involved from their perspective? There's so much expertise in the room.
I'll just say one thing, Yaa, if you want.
Thanks.
I can reflect back on when I was at primary school, long time ago, and it was pretty much a dominant white primary school. I grew up in a quite a dominant white part of London, and there were just a few children who had parents from the West Indies, from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, like my parents. And when one of the parents came into school to do an assembly for the entire school, most of the white children, most of the white teachers, that just changed perceptions and mindsets about difference. And I think if parents can have the confidence to come into school to share their experiences of cross-cultural encounters, of multiculturalism, and so on, that can really help to bring new knowledge, lived experiences to their local schools and local communities. So that is one way that parents can help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marlon. I think on that note, and on that challenging note as well, I think we're going to draw the webinar to a close. It's been an amazing, informative, interesting, illuminating, passionate event. Thank you so much for all the speakers. It's been my absolute pleasure to chair this event tonight. Thank you so much to our audience from all across Sussex for taking the time to join us this evening. As I said, we're going to use your comments, your questions, your ideas. Judy's just put something up about where the conversation can continue, and we're going to shape a report. Please complete the impact assessment of DRI's 16 years of work in Sussex with Black and minority ethnic communities, which you can access from Rukia, DRI's community development worker. And lastly, just to reiterate, thank you so much to our poets and speakers for sharing their expertise and passion. And thank you to you all for joining us tonight.